Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ed Randall's Talking Rams. Here on this video series, we are paying tribute to those men and women, members of our Athletic Hall of Fame, who distinguished themselves on the field of play and brought honor to Fordham University. We hope that you'll pass along word of this series to all your friends in the Fordham community and have them tune in. We continue our series of conversations with one of the greatest track and field cross-country athletes in Fordham's history. A native New Yorker, he became a Division I All-American and 1980 U.S. Olympic trial semifinalist. He received his undergraduate degree in 1978 and was inducted into our Hall of Fame in 1992. We welcome back to Fordham one of our great runners, Gene McCarthy. Gene, it's wonderful to have you with us. Tell us about your life before Fordham.
Well, Ed, first of all, what a pleasure for me to be with a living legend. I don't know. I don't want to be a legend. I want to be a living legend like you. But thank you for having me. Yeah. So I grew up in the Bronx, and oldest of five kids, lived in a two-bedroom apartment over by the reservoir, not far from Kingsbridge Road, maybe a mile from Fordham University. And I also, with an Irish immigrant family, nobody went to college. And so that was the aspiration for my parents, that someday we could all go to college, even though we didn't have the money for it. But when I was about 14 years old, I was a freshman at All Hallows, which is opened in 1909, as you're well aware, because you're an alumnus. Opened up on 164th and Walton Avenue, right off the Grand Concourse, right around the block from Yankee Stadium. And as a freshman, I thought I was going to be the point guard on the basketball team, because I went to Our Lady of Angels elementary school, and I wanted to be like the Dooley brothers who went to All Hallows, and I wanted to play basketball. So, of course, I am now, as an adult, 5'7" and 145 pounds. So I probably wasn't even this hefty when I was 14. So to be the starting point guard was probably a pipe dream. But anyway, I recall going to a field day. And at the field day, there was a big Irish Christian brother named Brother Pat Morgan. And he said, you have to compete in two events, and then you can go home. Now, I don't know what a field day was, because if it didn't include baseball, basketball, or football, I didn't know what field day was. So I ran the very first two events. I did rather well, because all I had my eyes on was the prize, the D train back to Kingsbridge Road. So Brother Morgan came up to me and said, before you go, I just want to say congratulations and welcome to the All Hallows cross country team. And I said, oh, brother, I don't think you understand. I am going to be the starting point guard for the Gales. And he says, well, I don't think you understand. I'm your math teacher, and you're going to be on the cross country. Later that year, I did well in cross country at Van Cortlandt Park. And later that year, I saw Sports Illustrated, and on the cover of Sports Illustrated were two guys running. Now, I was so used to seeing baseball players or basketball players or football players, but here's two guys running. I was struck by the image, the sinewy muscles, the grimacing. I read the article over and over again, and I declared at dinner that night at the age of 14, Mom and Dad and all my siblings who don't like me, which is all of them, I'm gonna break the 4-minute mile. And they didn't know what I was talking about. I got, several nods of, oh, that's nice, honey. I'll fast forward after graduating from All Hallows, I got about 50 scholarship offers to go. I was the fastest miler in New York City at the time. I was 4 minutes and 13 seconds. And I got 50 scholarship offers. And wouldn't you know, I pick a college a mile from my house called Fordham University. And my time at Fordham, Pete Carlissimo was our athletic director. PJ was a little bit older than me, graduated just a year or two before me, I believe. And then anyway, I joined Fordham at that time. And then if it weren't for seeing that magazine, I don't think I ever would have been a runner, nor would I have ever gone to college, because our family couldn't afford it. So a scholarship to Fordham was, just something that came from the heavens, quite frankly, Ed.
Ed, give me, Gene, your earliest memory that you were faster than all the other kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's interesting. We grew up, as I mentioned, over at Our Lady of Angels Parish, and there was a park. We called it the park, but basically it was just a big asphalt thing with a fence around it. And that was the thing. There was a kid named Artie Dosher, and he was the fastest kid in the neighborhood. So I was the one when I went to All Hallows, they wanted me to race the fastest kid in the neighborhood, Artie Dosher. But I don't think I ever looked at being the fastest. I looked at it more as when I first ran my first cross country race, at Van Cortlandt Park, scared to death. We're all in our gym uniforms, which looks like navy blue underwear. There's about 100 kids, and I won the race. And I became intoxicated with this idea of, if you work hard and if you believe in something, you can win something. And from a very early age, that became rather important to me. So running for me became a means to an end, Ed, not necessarily a means in itself. I see these people jogging. I live in Long Beach, and on the boardwalk right outside my front door here, I see people jogging and they seem so happy. I was never happy when I ran, because I treated it as a means to an end. I was interested in what it could get me, whether it was a trophy, a medal, or in this case, a scholarship. And wouldn't you know, Fordham University, being coached by Tommy Byrne.
You mentioned the other sports. I was going to ask you, Gene, who were your idols growing up? Were they in other sports, or did you, in fact, the way in which you fell into track and field, did you have any idols there?
I didn't, until I saw that cover of Sports Illustrated. And the two guys on the cover of that magazine were Jim Ryan, who was the first high schooler to break the 4-minute mile.
Right.
And he was shoulder to shoulder with a guy named Marty LaCourie, who went to Essex Catholic in Newark, New Jersey, and then to Villanova. And hope to make that magazine cover story interesting, once I graduated from Fordham, I only ran 4:03, so 3 seconds away from my goal. And I wrote a long letter to Marty LaCourie. I got his address from one of the brothers at All Hallows. And I thought Marty would send me a list of workouts. And instead, that letter changed my life, because following my graduation from Fordham, I moved to Florida. And I trained with Marty, who at the time was the best 5,000-meter runner in the world, and some other famous Olympians. But still, my Fordham years set me up for that. And I'm still quite proud of that.
At All Hallows, you won more than 90 races. The college recruiters come calling. You mentioned you had 50 offers. Why did Tom Byrne and Fordham win your services?
So it's a couple of things. First of all, Tom Byrne did the best job of charming my parents, who knew nothing about college, and took us to a nice dinner. And he and my dad enjoyed a nice Jack Daniel's Manhattan or 3. Anyway, so they had that in common. But I was also intrigued by a guy that Tommy had coached both in high school and at Fordham, who had just graduated, and his name was Marcel Philippe. And Marcel Philippe went to Martyr Christie High School in Queens. His parents moved from France. He would eventually become a French Olympian. And I thought, wouldn't that be great? I'm here in New York. It's a legendary school. I remember growing up and watching Digger Phelps and Charlie Yelverton, and being one of the best basketball teams, not only in the region, but in the country. And so Fordham had an allure for me. And but to train with Marcel Philippe, who was in Fordham Law at that time, and to work with a guy like Tommy Byrne, who my parents were fond of, I just thought this is the simplest and easiest thing to do, rather than go to a big school in the Southeastern Conference or something like that. So it worked out well.
And coming from a working class family, I'm assuming you were the first in your family or in your extended family to go to Fordham.
The first person to go to college, never mind Fordham. I have 2 siblings that went to Iona. One went to Lehman, right around the other side of the reservoir, and one went to school upstate New York. So college was a foreign object, Ed, in our family. And it would just be determined that I would go get a laborer's job, even out of high school, because college just wasn't part of the story. So running served me well. Without learning the value of the sport, I never would have seen the world. I never would have received a free education and an excellent education. And I never would have had what turned out to be a 40-year career in the same industry, where my avocation and vocation turned out to become the same thing.
How lucky are you? First day on campus, you remember that?
I do. I was scared to death. I had never seen anything like it, for a reason that you're well aware. I went to an all-boys high school, All Hallows, just like you did. You went to All Hallows. And this was the first time aside from going to grammar school, that I ever saw girls on campus. So that was, that was a big a head snapper. And my very first day on campus, I remember it being very warm. They had an orientation, and I was fortunate that there was a guy named Jackie Lynch, whose father, John Lynch, was an alumnus of Fordham. He ran for Fordham Prep, and he was my roommate, and he knew his way around. But I also distinctly remember these two girls that were seniors. Now, seniors look like adults to me, and I felt like a child. And these two girls interviewed me for the Ram, and they were asking me questions in Tommy's office, and I thought, wow, I've never experienced anything like this. Put it this way, I was ridiculously naive, incredibly immature, but overwhelmed by this experience. I still remember it to this day, just all the buildings and the old beautiful structures and people coming and going and walking. I've never seen anything like that before. Even when I visited Fordham, I don't recall it being that way. So a fond memory.
Which school were you in? You were
Well,
in, back then it was CBA, as they called it, and
yeah,
then
it wasn't called the
it was,
Bell.
of course, college, and then for those of us like who were there when the Earth's crust was still cooling, there was still Thomas More College.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was in CBA, which is now, of course, called Gabelli. I majored in marketing, and to this day, I have no idea why, but it seemed to work out for me very, very well.
I'll say so. Did you know what field of study you wanted to pursue before arriving at Fordham?
Ed, I'll highlight that point again about being naive and very immature. I didn't even know what marketing was, and I had the good fortune that I had teammates that were older than me. So you have instant friends when you belong to a team.
Right, right.
Many kids go to college, and it's the hardest thing in the world is to meet somebody, particularly when you walk in a dorm room and there's somebody there that you've never met in your life, and you're going to have to
Right.
endure them for a year. So I noticed that some of the guys were in what they called the business school, and I figured
Mhm.
I'd rather be in the business school. And it wasn't so much about picking marketing; it was about, well, I don't think finance is going to work for me. And I just picked something that sounded more modern. My roommate Mike Byrne from Seaford, he picked computer science, which at the time was fascinating because there was no such thing as a computer. So marketing was this modern way of approaching business, at least back then in 1974. So.
So we'll assume that was your favorite subject. Tell us, Gene, about your least favorite subject.
It was we had to take a course. I don't even think they have it anymore. It was called statistics. And I just, for the life of me, couldn't grasp it, even though it was full of just profound logic. And I
Mhm.
think why I enjoyed marketing is I was very astute at Our Lady of Angels and at All Hallows of gazing out the window and daydreaming. And I finally turned that into a career that if I came up with creative thoughts and ideas, and I think that's better suited for marketing than, of course, statistics. So I had a lot of help on the track team to get me through statistics, but I still have nightmares today. How many years later, almost 50 years later, waking up that I have a statistics final and I hadn't studied because I don't know how to study. So.
A caring professor who inspired you and made a lasting impression.
Wow. Um, a caring professor. Oh boy, Ed. I remember, you're going to hate me for this. I remember the faces and not necessarily the names. There was one guy in CBA, and he wasn't Jesuit. And what I was fascinated by him was he was a short, stocky guy with dark hair, Italian guy. I remember his name if you told me. And he actually worked on Wall Street and then came and taught a class as an adjunct professor. So I'm not serving you or your viewers or listeners very well right now, but I can't remember his name. But I remember distinctly thinking that he had real life experience and he was teaching us something that he was going
Mhm.
to later get on the subway and go back downtown and practice. And that just struck me as something important and positive.
Gene, talk about the academic rigor that you experienced, balancing being a student athlete with your course caseload.
Mhm. Yeah, the term student athlete sometimes can be a contradiction in terms because it is like having two separate jobs. So, one thing that was a big adjustment, Ed, was you have to figure out, like, you didn't have classes in succession like you did in high school. You may have a couple of hours off. And it took me a while, I won't kid you, until maybe my junior year, where I finally figured out that that time off wasn't a time to watch TV. That was a time to get work done. And I learned the art of trying to get it done so I didn't have to do it later, and stay ahead of it. And then the other problem that we had was, track practice was every day. And the one thing about cross country track, and it's 9 or 10 months out of the year. So it's not like some of the other sports, which were seasonal, whether it be baseball, football, or basketball. So, and then the beauty of it was in what we called C House. That's I lived in Martyrs Court, but in C House, that's where they had suites at the time. And there was a suite of track guys, older juniors and seniors. And that's where I found myself going, not only to get work done, but also to get help. And I learned at a very early age not to be afraid to ask for the help. And sometimes kids today are just maybe a little timid or a little shy about doing that. It's the hardest thing in the world. I had the privilege the other day, last week, of speaking to the student athletes at Fordham. I was invited by Brian Horowitz, who's the head track coach. And there's, several hundred of them in the room. And I was looking at them and I'm realizing you guys have the hardest thing to do. You have to figure out how to give your most physical and emotional and psychological performance as an athlete, but you also have to give your most intellectual performance as a student. And that not only takes up a lot of time, it takes up a lot of discipline, and it also takes focus and determination. And not every kid is blessed with focus and determination. So college was tough. And I won't kid you, but Fordham was academically, in the upper echelon, and so were the classes. I spoke to a young woman today who contacted me after that class, and she's got like 6 finals between now and December 20th. And yeah, I know. And so it's tough, but the benefit and the value that you get out of it, not just where it can take you with your career, but the benefit that you get out of learning the disciplines. That's immeasurable for the rest of your life.
You made reference to it a moment ago. Tell us where you lived through the years.
Yeah, so I lived in, I think it was called Martyrs Court, and that's what it's called, the freshman dorms. And every other floor was boy, girl, boy, girl. My roommate, Jackie Lynch, was on the track team, and I had known him, from competing against him in high school. And then for my last 3 years, I did move over to C House, which, was a little raucous. 8 student athletes in a suite with 2 toilets, 2 sinks, maid service. That was good. So you had to learn to cook, prepare your own meals. I did have a meal plan, part of my scholarship, but some of these other guys didn't. So it was the balance of learning how to figure out how to live without a mom and a dad to take care of you. And we had a lot of fun in C House. There were 6 of us that were runners, including a guy that I went to a halls with named Ed Walsh, who I'm still very close to today. But we had 2 other guys, and they were the Mina brothers, M-I-N-A, Rick and Nick. They were twins, and they played on the football team. And they would have arguments, and they would settle their disputes like any Italian football player would. They'd wreck the joint, wrestling all over the floor, food flying and everything. And then the rest of us would be all topsy-turvy. And then those guys would be sitting there watching TV because they got over their fight and like nothing happened. So, there was all kinds of things that we went through in C House. But, and I think there still is, there was a deli on the lower level of Martyrs Court, right across the way. And then I'll never forget, they made the best subs ever in the world. So anyway, great experience, C House.
A favorite building on campus?
Which one? It was definitely Keating. And I'll tell you why. When I walked in there the other day, because my address to the student athletes was in the auditorium at Keating. Yeah. I'll never forget when I first walked in there, there's one corridor which just has these wooden benches, and it was very church-like. And it was very peaceful. And no matter what was going on the other corridors on the left and the right of it, you could sit there and take a breather. And it was funny. I sat there. I got there an hour early before Brian Horowitz found me. And I was just sitting there almost decompressing for the first time in 50 years. So it's definitely one of my favorite buildings. And of course, when you graduate on Edwards Parade, Alan Alda was our commencement speaker, and
Wow.
I won an award at graduation. But just seeing that majestic building, and the clock tower and the stairs, and I mean, it's ingrained in my mind. But every time I go there, it's like I'd never been there before. It's like I'd only seen it in a postcard, and it comes back to life for you. It's a spectacular building.
Um, did you have a favorite hangout? Did you have time for a favorite hangout?
So back then, the drinking age was 18. And in the student center, I forget what building that's called. Why do I not know this? I just passed it. They had a thing in the basement. It was called the Rathskeller. I don't know
Right.
if you call that. And
Yeah, the Ramskeller.
the Ramskeller, that's what it was.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
a take on Rathskeller. And they used to have, I saw Steve Martin in there before he even became famous. There was a sign on campus that says, "Come here, comedian Steve Martin." He was on the Johnny Carson show. And we went to see Steve Martin, who took us all, walked across campus to White Castle, and we're all following him. And he went in and ordered one French fry. And that was the joke. And now you think back on it. But I don't know. I think we hung out in the suites a lot. I think in the
Mm.
evenings we were tired. We never really could enjoy the social life because on Saturdays we always had track meets. So
Right.
Friday nights, if anything, it was hard to get sleep, when the rest of the campus was having a lot of fun. There were a couple of places across the trestle,
Right.
um, and
Penny whistle
Penny Whistle. And
and
so
the pick and shovel.
the pick and job. Well, Ed, you are a professional.
Dating myself. Yes.
So yes, we would do that occasionally. I think that was the fun of it. But track was what we were there for. I put this undue pressure on myself that I had to earn my scholarship every day. So I had my fun. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of my teammates that will attest to that. But I dreaded the idea of losing a scholarship because I wasn't diligent about my sport and my studies.
Mm. You mentioned you were on the meal plan, which leads me to, was the cafeteria food the pinnacle of fine dining with your meal plan?
Yeah, I just went to a gala event at Cipriani in Wall Street the other day, and as I was sampling the food, it reminded me of the meal plan food. Now, of course, I say that facetiously. It was edible. There were some things better than others,
Mm.
but I kind of stuck to French fries and things that were no good for me as a runner. But
Did you have time to work any jobs while you were at Fordham? Part-time jobs or anything?
no, I didn't. There was a guy on our team. He was a senior when I was a freshman, and his name was John Jurgens, and he worked for the physical plant and drove a van around.
Hmm.
He was a guy that eventually went to law school, but worked hard in his studies, was a great runner, ran a 401 mile in his senior year, but he also worked at the physical plant. I didn't. My working history was limited to delivering prescription drugs on Cedric Road to as Bernie, the druggist, the pharmacist, called the shut-ins, and I delivered them when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I worked at a Baskin Robbins, and when I was at All Hallows, though, I did deliver dry cleaning in Manhattan with famous customers like Bill Bradley and Carly Simon and Soupy Sales. But other than that, when I was at Fordham, no, there was no time. And even in the summers, I didn't really work. I ran for the New York AC, and
I know.
and
Yeah.
also I tried to rest a little bit. It's rigorous to be an athlete, never mind a student athlete, and never mind at a high level institution like Fordham.
You did much of your training on the streets of the Bronx, which, Gene, I can't even imagine, which must have been just nerve-wracking, just enduring the elements of running the streets of the Bronx.
Ed, if you go back to that time, we're talking about my time was 74 to 78. The Bronx wasn't exactly a garden spot, even though it had the botanical gardens. I do recall at one point even running up Fordham Road, sometimes just to change the scenery. And a guy saw me running and ran up to me and lifted his arms up and threw me up against the wall. And I was so shaken by it, I just walked back to campus. Yeah, it wasn't runner friendly. Never mind, was it friendly in general? But I still love the spirit of Fordham Road with all the different shops and the restaurants. And I think there was a like I forget, there was a Schrafft's or someplace. There was all these little cool
It
places on
was.
Fordham Road. And my mother, even her very first job, which was sacrilege for a woman to go to work back then, her first job was working in Alexander's, right on the corner of Fordham and the Grand
Wow.
Concourse. But
Wow.
yeah, the Bronx was tough, and I think it was not until my second or third year, sophomore year maybe, when we had the Lombardi Center. So we didn't really have the best facilities to train. We'd have to, in the winter, we'd go to the Columbia Bubble, and which was kind of a haul. They had an
Right.
indoor track, which was basically nothing but a bubble, and but that's better than high school, where we had to go to the Armory every day from All
Yeah.
Hallows on, in Washington. But
168. Right.
yeah, we didn't really have the luxury of good training facilities. Actually, we trained a lot at Mount St. Michael.
Hmm.
So we didn't have the glamorous life that I may have had if I went to an SEC school, but that's okay. I think the tough tumble that we had for training made us tougher in competition, quite
I
frankly.
agree. Your first race for Fordham.
Yeah, my first race was cross country, which was a shock to the mind and the body, because in high school it's 2.5 miles at Van Cortlandt. And when I had graduated from All Hallows, I was the third fastest ever at Van Cortlandt Park as a high schooler. College, Fordham was 5 miles. Now I think it's
Mhm.
6.2, 10,000 meters. That was a shock to the system, not only because it was twice as long, but because the course had an element that the high school course didn't have, which was called Cemetery Hill, which is where the Van Cortlandts actually were buried. And that hill was incredibly steep, and it was make or break. If you could feel good conquering Cemetery Hill, then you had a good shot at finishing strong. But I do remember that quite well, my freshman year.
You got off to a great start at Fordham. And we have to talk about this because this was incredible when I was doing my research for this interview. In cross country as a freshman, you helped Fordham qualify for the NCAA championship for the first time in 96 years. But the school refused to send the team, saying you weren't good enough. Then I had to read this twice. Who told you no? Who told the team, no, you're not going?
Mr. Carlissimo, Pete Carlissimo. It had to be approved by him, and he told us that they couldn't endure the expense. It was a shock to the system going to a school like Fordham, where I thought that all sports were treated equal. And this isn't to blame anybody. It was just in times. So there was the power sports like football and basketball, and then there were track and field, tennis, even water polo. Look at them now; they're like one of the best in the country. And back
Yeah.
then, nobody cared about it, so they wouldn't let us go. We're talking about maybe 8 or 9 plane tickets to Bloomington, Indiana, and they didn't.
And yet you offered to pay, right? You come up with
Yeah.
a we're going to pay, and they still said no.
Yes, they were actually, there was a little thing on campus where students were going to raise money for us and for funds to go. So NCAA rules aside, it was a punch to the gut. And after I had done well in high school, and I chose Fordham with all the good intentions, I was a little bit jaded by the whole situation.
And I read also, Gene, that you demonstrated your disdain by running in pairs around the campus for 24 hours on the day the NCAAs were held in Bloomington, Indiana. And yet that also didn't get you to Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, so it was a week before the NCAAs. We had qualified several weeks before. A week before, we were gathering in the C House, seniors and juniors. Of course, I was a freshman, and one guy said, "You know what we should do on Monday? The NCAAs were always held on a Monday. We should run around. We should go run around Edwards Parade, and we should record our times at the exact same time as the NCAAs and just compare our times to see how we would have done." Now, of course, Bloomington, Indiana's, cross country course is not the same as a very flat Edwards Parade. But what happened was somehow that evolved into, why don't we just have a relay, and we'll just run for as long as we can, 24 hours,
Oh,
just to show our sign of solidarity. So nobody paid attention. And then in the evening, students came out, and even some other athletes from other sports would jog with us a little bit. Some people brought us, food and beverages. And somebody, not sure whom, contacted a guy named Gerald Eskenazi, who was a beat writer at the New York Times, a
New York
sports
Times.
writer.
Sure.
He showed up on campus hearing about this. Somebody even brought a car, so we had lights on the field. And he came out and asked us what we were doing, and we told him, and he even brought a photographer, and it made the New York Times the next day, which wasn't what the athletic department wanted to see, Mr. Colissimo and his team. So we did it to just show that, okay, you can tell us no, but we're going to tell you you were wrong. So we didn't go. And however, when we qualified for the NCAAs a few months later, the 2-mile relay, which was John Juergens, myself, and the Trammell twins, Eric and Alex, they were quick to say we can go to Cobo Hall in Detroit and compete in the 2-mile relay. And I'm glad they did, because we got second. We lost by a step to Princeton. Right. And I think we had the 4th fastest 2-mile relay time in the world.
Right.
So
right at the IC 4A championship. I just want to move off the script for a second.
Sure.
When you don't get that support that you would assume you're going to get, how do you go on? You personally and the team, how do you move on from that, knowing that the administration is not behind you? How do you do that?
Well, I won't kid you. Some guys, particularly the older guys on the team, they were just, okay, what am I even doing this for? They were thinking more about their future careers and all that. Here I was a freshman, and I was like, did I make the right choice going to Fordham University? It's a horrible thing to think at this point, but I had no choice to do that. If you qualify for the NCAAs, you just go. So I will tell you, it took even the wind out of my sails for a while. But and there were times, and I'm embarrassed of this, that I was going through the motions as an athlete, but we still performed well. We had a distance medley relay that did well at the Penn Relays, a 4-mile relay. We've had set school records. We did a whole bunch of things. And I think where the motivation came from was we wanted to save face with the people we competed against. So when you compete against Villanova, who were the best ever at the time, or even across the Bronx and Manhattan College, you just wanted to say, okay, this happened to us, but we're not going to let it get us down. We kind of had our pride, and our bravado was high, and I think that's what kept us going.
But it's fair to say that the athletic department at Fordham University never acknowledged your achievements.
That's correct. And I got used to that. I thought, well, I guess you have to be you have to be Darryl Brown on the basketball team to get those achievements. Or what was his name? I think his name was Andre Davis. Was that his name? He was on the football team, a great running back. And I thought, oh, we're just track guys, we're just a secondary sport. And unfortunately, even though you don't think of that consciously, you start to almost believe that, like, oh shucks, we're just the track guys. But when I look back on it, and I see some of the records we set, the competition that we competed against, the people who recognized our school as a good track school, it's only then that I realized, wow, we were not bad despite these setbacks.